in this area, we've covered about 500 square kilometers of landscape with the cameras. So we've identified 29 different individuals. That does include 5 cubs overall. So it's probably about half the density of what we're getting in some of the protected areas that we've worked.
We started leopard work some years back now, and we've worked throughout the country in different habitats. We worked in the central highlands of Sri Lanka as well, and we were planning to work in one of the larger protected areas here, the Peak Wilderness Sanctuary, where no work had been done previously. But last year, that was in around 2016, we had about 8 leopard deaths that occurred in and around the estate areas that surround Peak Wilderness. And we realized that there was something going on and that perhaps we needed to focus our work in this mixed landscape area first before going into the actual protected area to try to understand what was going on, why these deaths were occurring, what was the movement patterns and so on. When we started looking in a little closer to why these leopard deaths were occurring in this particular tea landscape, we realized that we needed to actually approach some of the resident tea companies here. And interestingly enough, at the same time, we too got approached by Resplendent Ceylon, which runs the Tea Trails program here within some of the tea estates and is a partner organization of Dilma Tea, which is a large tea corporation here in Sri Lanka. And they have an arm called Dilma Conservation as well. So we partnered together and they gave us this house that now basically is the Dunkhill Conservation Station, where the WWCT team is able to call home and work in this whole area. Unfortunately, over 100 years ago, when the landscape was changed with coffee and then tea plantations, what happened was a lot of the original high forests were converted for coffee and then tea, and these ridge forests, being so high, were left. So what has happened now is these ridge forests have also become patch forests, as it were. In some areas they are connected, like here for example, they do connect the two sides of Peak Wilderness, which is a much larger protected area. In other areas they're just tiny patches by themselves, and then you get things like this, which is eucalyptus or pinus that surround it and form a slightly larger buffer, which we're finding wildlife is also using.
I did a lot of behavioral work following lions. They were radio collared, so you could find them, but then once you located them, they were quite amenable to having you kind of watch them. They were in open areas, not infrequently, whereas leopards, very difficult to do that, especially in certain landscapes like this one where there's a lot of people. So you use a lot more remote cameras and things, and you're looking more at signs and their tracks and that sort of thing. So very different ways to approach.
I don't think we ever expected to have the kind of success that we have had with monitoring leopards and getting the actual movement. And to have actually established that this ridge is a very, very important connector, and that there is a resident population of leopards here.
This device is used to check whether it's fine and working or not. With this cat we collect, we are going to dry them, and then we give them to the Colombo University. They analyze what it is, and then if there are bones in it or seeds in it, what kind of prey they belong to. I like wildlife and stuff related to it, so I thought of after my exams, until the vacation is over, I can volunteer and maybe do something I really like. One of my hobbies is like traveling and then helping, volunteering, and then maybe try to help rather than just staying at home.
One of the really interesting things that we've been able to pick up with the cameras is some of the movement patterns and some of the space use of some of these animals. And so a good example of that is this fellow who's an adult male who we have nicknamed Arnold. Our field assistants nicknamed him Arnold because the first image we got of him was a very close-up picture, and he's looking very big and strong, and so they named him after Arnold Schwarzenegger. We managed to get images of this fellow all over the landscape in a lot of different locations. And so when we put those together chronologically, we can get a bit of an idea of some of the movement patterns. Not necessarily, there's going to be gaps in between, but we can see some of the patterns in terms of how he's going through the landscape, and especially the area that he's covering. So we got him on the edge of the forest. That was the first image we got of him. Next image was quite a distance away, about 8 kilometers away at a different camera. And then we started picking him up, in between, covering an area of about 32 square kilometers, which we realized was an absolute minimum.
In a landscape such as this, where obviously there's lots of humans on the landscape, for us not to actually see the leopard is a good thing, because then you know that there is coexistence working. They are moving in the nighttime when there aren't humans on the landscape, and then humans can go about doing what they need to do in the daytime. And so you prevent conflict from occurring, and you can continue in a coexistence sort of framework.
These are snares set for small animals, like black-naped hare. And so what they do is they put a stake into the earth on one side of the trail. There's actually a wire which has been taken, which goes across, connecting to the stake on the other side. We see as it gets sometimes the neck, but mostly the waist, and cinches tight. And so then sometimes what we've had is people have seen that animal, but then by seeing it they draw attention to it, and a lot more people come to look and to see because it's of interest. That really agitates the leopard, and so it's desperate to get away, and it pulls and pulls even harder and tightens that noose, and can often do internal damage, and that results in death.
Our final goal would be to ensure that this ridge gets protection, enough protection that it will stay as is.
The mother and the 2 fairly young cubs that are in the area, and it's clear from the time that they were here last night, about 8:15 p.m. yesterday evening. Oh, it's fantastic. This is what you're trying to do. This is why you're putting the cameras where you're putting them, and trying to keep a track of these animals. So to get cubs on the cameras is really interesting.
Okay, so that was just a little video to sort of give you the story of what's been going on for the past few years up in this particular area. Now, when we started work, our team there, we never ever imagined in a million years that we would get this kind of information. It was pouring with rain as it is right now. 2 years ago in August, we started this work, full of leechers. We were roaming around all over, basically thinking, how do we do this? So the kind of information that we have got from there, and then using that information to now push forward for a new protected area, this ridge, for us, it's been really uplifting. And really, that's what has brought us back to this whole concept and this notion that we're talking about today of using the leopard as an umbrella. Because perhaps on a small island like Sri Lanka, 65,000 square kilometers, 22 million people, we say this all the time, we're still one of the 25 biodiversity hotspots. So if we want to continue this, hope for the best, then perhaps we need to start prioritizing. We spoke about Arnold. We showed you how one male was on the landscape, but he's not alone on the landscape, of course. These are all the other males that are around him here. And more importantly, these little triangles are the females. So as you can see, they have positioned themselves smartly along this ridge. And so this really what has led us to this ridge and the realization that it's not just males that are moving through. The males are moving through the high-risk areas of tea estates, and the females have chosen to sit tight on the ridge, and they are breeding, as you saw. And Andrew will go through a little bit more in detail because we're doing long-term work here too to try and understand how this works, how this system functions in the long term. So it is this information that then led us to actually identifying this ridge. As you can see here on this Google image, the dark green at the bottom is peak wilderness. Tea all around, Castlereagh and Muskelia reservoirs, those sort of star-shaped things that you see at the bottom and at the top. This ridge is part of the watershed for those 2 reservoirs, and those 2 reservoirs, as we all know, is what gives us electricity. So by protecting this ridge, not only are we obviously giving the space for the leopard to continue to persist there, all of the other cats that we're finding there, and all of the other biodiversity that we have in there, but it's also protecting key watershed forests for this island. So just talking again about other species that we're finding on this ridge. So we've moved on now from just leopard work to actually assess this ridge, as you can see at the top there, above the T there, that's what we have there. What are the other things we're finding here? So as you can see, we've got nationally endangered species here that are coming up. And this is, just work that's beginning. The tokmacaques primates to frogs to lizards to birds. So it is it's a home, it's a host area for all of these different species, not just the, iconic leopard all the way down to all those little guys who are very important. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to talk a little bit more about how some of the in-depth work that we use, how we also turn that in for conservation.